Bella Salon and Day Spa, located at 41 West Main Street in Northeast Pennsylvania, proudly supports Chautauqua Sunrise and its volunteers. More information at bellasalonanddayspa.net. Funding is provided by a grant from New York State Senator Catherine M. Young, representing Western New York's 57th District with a local office in Olean. Chautauqua Sunrise is made possible by a grant from Fredonia Place, a continuing care retirement community providing dignity in a modern luxury environment. From the Access Channel 5 studios in Mayville, it's Chautauqua Sunrise. Chautauqua Sunrise is hosted by Doc Hamels and supported by the award-winning volunteers at Access Channel 5. Continuing the traditions of Senior Report, we are here to share local news, colorful interviews, and events of interest to everyone. Chautauqua Sunrise is broadcast live Saturday mornings each week, countywide, from 9 to 10 a.m. Join us by calling in live, emailing us, or checking out our social media. And now, from the Channel 5 studios, it's Chautauqua Sunrise.
Hey everybody, Doc Hamels here on Coronado Island Beach. Yes, it's cool down here just as well. Looking forward to seeing all of you real soon. Just want to remind you that coming up next Saturday, February 28th, we have our 1000th Saturday morning show. Excuse me, with Terry Kinberg in the Safety Village. March 4th, we got the Steward for Children, our special child advocacy training at the Westfield YWCA, and I encourage everybody to attend that. I'm going to be there. And also, I want to thank Jim Subjack and his guests for being on the show today. And I hope you have a great time, Jim. I know you're a pro at this. And I have a little video that Chris or Jeff are going to show here in a little bit, because we're just having a howling good time down here in San Diego, California. I'll see you soon. Stay warm.
Now that was a nasty cut. He's there, and when he says cool, by the way, he's talking about 60s, probably low 70s, and here we are. This is the first time I can remember in my car that the temperature on the thermometer didn't have a dash in front of the number itself. It was a balmy 14 as I drove here. Obviously, I'm not Doc Hamels, and as you may have heard, I'm Jim Subjack. You may recognize me. I've been guest host before, especially with Reed, and then I've been a frequent guest both when I was DA and even sometimes thereafter. In fact, was a guest with Doc not more than about a month or two ago. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to an exciting show. It's going to be very informative, and stay warm. Don't think that this is a remake of the almost 100-year-old film Nanook of the North. This is really an informational program. I thought long and hard about how I wanted to present it, and I was very fortunate to obtain the services of a very knowledgeable young woman who was going to talk to us about elder abuse and all the forms of it, what we can do about it, and we'll go from there. And I believe we have some PSAs to run. Thank you. Well, I understand we don't have the PSAs quite yet to run. Announcements. We have announcements to run. I'm sorry. The PSAs come later. So here's the announcements.
You can talk about them a little bit.
Okay, you see that we have, the first announcement is sexual abuse prevention training. That obviously is a very hot button topic as well. Preventing child abuse is a job for adults. That is something obviously that goes hand in hand with what we talk about today. And they're all tragic aspects of society, and unfortunately they occur, and hopefully we can do something to prevent them, and so hopefully we can do something to injure those in a different way, legally I mean, the perpetrators who do those horrible things to spouses, to significant others, to children, to the elderly, or to total strangers. We have a save the date. It's April 23rd at the Athenaeum. That's
25th, and it's also child advocacy.
okay. It's 25th, and it's child advocacy. The screen is blocked by the table here. Morning. Fundamentals of white wine at the Grape Discovery Center in Westfield. I'm a red wine drinker, but for those of you that enjoy white wine, I certainly encourage you to attend that. That is Saturday. And again, I'm not Doc Hamels, so. My guest today, if we're there. No. Next week is the 1,000th show. It seems to me that I've been on most of them, but that's not obviously true. This is show number 999. As you know, Reed was originally the host, Reed Powers, a terrific man, and unfortunately passed away recently. And Doc, of course, is his extremely capable replacement. And he will then host, I believe, the 1,000th show.
Chit chat. All right, here we go.
I have no idea what this is.
That's his favorite impression. All right.
That, by the way, is indicative of Doc's howling good time in San Diego, I believe shot at the San Diego Zoo. I encourage those of you that have not been to San Diego to do so. The zoo and the Wild Animal Park, which is about 15, 20 miles away from San Diego, are both terrific facilities, and you would have a great time. But he's there with probably the nicest climate in the United States, year in, year out, day in, day out. Anyway, my guest today is Sarah Duval from Legal Services for the Elderly, Disabled, Disadvantages of Western New York. She's a staff attorney with that organization, focusing on combating and preventing elder abuse. Welcome, Sarah. I thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself? For example, how long have you worked for Legal Services for the Elderly?
I've worked for Legal Services since September of 2012.
And enjoy the job, obviously. We've spoken before.
Yeah, I think it's a really great organization, and I love my job.
Now, this is one of those situations where people need to understand, and lawyers have a bad name, and for the most part, they brought it upon themselves. The reason they bring upon themselves, I'm not a television lawyer. For those of you that know me, those of you that have been my clients, I've never advertised. I refuse to go on TV. I refuse to go on the radio. They hold themselves out as being experts in fields they know nothing about. They commit malpractice, and as a result, all lawyers are bad. But Sarah represents that group of lawyers who nobody gives credit, which is those who dedicate their lives and their service, their education, to helping other individuals. I'm not going to embarrass her by asking her salary. Maybe it's more than I expect, but she's clearly not in it for the money. She's in it to perform good for the community, perform good for those that she serves, and people like Sarah need to be commended. Now that I've said that, Sarah, and perhaps embarrassed you, what types of elder abuse are there?
Well, we see kind of 5 main kinds of elder abuse, and elder abuse can be many forms. Generally, it's the mistreatment of a person simply because of their age, but we see physical, financial, emotional, sexual, and neglect.
Can we talk a little bit about each one?
Of course.
Okay, let's talk a little bit first about the physical, which would seem to be the most obvious, but not necessarily so. Wouldn't that be correct?
That's correct, yes. Unfortunately, so the majority of abuse that our office handles is not the nursing home cases, nursing home neglect, although that certainly happens. But it's cases where the abuser is often the caregiver.
So, for example, a child or a friend?
Child, friend, grandchild, neighbor, other relative. It's someone whom the elderly person trusts and entrusts with their care. So that's unfortunately what we see. And with abuse like physical, as people age, they bruise more easily, right? The blood gets thinner, you know.
And sometimes they're actually taking blood thinners.
Yeah, actually taking blood thinners. So it's not uncommon to see increased bruising as people age.
Which has nothing to do with neglect.
Right, correct,
Right.
yes. I mean, you know, you bump your elbow on a table and your whole arm is black and blue. So that makes discovering physical abuse in the elderly population difficult because...
Much more difficult than it would be for a younger individual.
Yes, yes, and caregivers often explain it away by saying if they are being abusive, which the majority are not. I mean, this is a very small subset of caregivers.
Thank God.
Yes. But they will explain it away by stating, oh, you know, mom just bumped herself on the table, or she fell down the stairs, or, oh, she, you know, hit her head. People bruise so easily. So you really have to look out for specific patterns of bruising. For example, like finger marks if someone's being grabbed. And you really have to pay extra attention. And you have to let the elderly person speak for themselves outside of the presence of a caregiver if you do suspect that the bruising isn't simply is suspicious.
Would it be safe to say, though, especially if the caregiver is a child, for example, or a spouse, that they either might be reluctant for blood reasons or afraid of the caregiver to actually speak even when they're not in the presence of the abuser?
Of course. Elder abuse is severely underreported. And it is because, I think, because people are hesitant to speak against loved ones. Also because one of the most common threats that we hear these abusive caregivers give to their family members or friends that they're taking care of, supposedly, is, well, if you don't do this or you tell anyone, I'll send you to a nursing home. And people do not want to end up in nursing homes.
Correct.
Yeah.
Would it also be fair to say that one of the reasons they may not report it is the embarrassment of it? They don't want their friends to know that their child is hitting them?
Of course. I mean, there's a huge amount of embarrassment and shame in these cases, and they're very complex. Anytime you have a family dynamic, it's going to have these added layers of complexity. And also, one of the big red flags of elder abuse is isolation. Abusive caregivers tend to isolate the elderly person from other friends, from other family, from community organizations. So one of the biggest red flags I always stress to seniors is if you have a friend whom used to come to church all the time or used to go to the senior center with, or you'd be active in community groups, and all of a sudden they stop showing up and there's this kind of new family member or friend in their life, that's concerning. It's really important to keep active and not be isolated.
Probably, and I don't know the statistics on this, but isn't it also a fair statement at least that elder abuse isn't necessarily a regular thing by the caregiver? It may be a loss of temper, a bad day is the lay way to say it, that they just lash out and strike.
Yeah, well, there's that kind of, there's the model of the stressed caregiver. I mean, caregiving is very stressful, and there are a lot of resources for caregivers, but it is extremely stressful to be a caregiver. So there is that the genuinely stressed caregiver. However, I think people have a tendency to sometimes explain away actual abuse by stating that it's just a stressed caregiver. If you are a caregiver and you are stressed, there are resources out there available that are better than lashing out at your ward who is really helpless. Yeah.
It may be also, though, a reason it's not reported. Well, he doesn't hit me all the time. Only once in a while.
Of course.
And it didn't hurt that badly.
It parallels domestic violence, traditional inter-partner domestic violence in that way, where an abusive act is followed by, oh my gosh, mom or dad, I can't believe that. I'm so sorry. It'll never happen again, and I want to take care of you, but. It's still abuse.
And it still continues.
Yeah, and it's continuous, yeah.
Well, how about the emotional abuse part of it?
Well, the emotional abuse, often I see the elder abuse kind of start off with this emotional abuse, this degradation of an elderly person of, oh, you can't do that, or yelling at somebody simply because they're older, yelling at somebody because they can do less for themselves.
When they start to get dementia or even memory loss, it's making fun of them as a result of that, and you can't remember this, you don't do that.
Kind of blaming them and having
Yeah.
that lack of empathy and understanding, and threats, a lot of threats, like I mentioned the nursing home threat, which is so common, but also, well, you can't call this person, you can't go here. If you want to go to church, I have to take you, and if you don't do this, I won't drive you.
And it would seem those are by far the most difficult to detect and do anything about, because usually I would think there's nobody there when that type of abuse occurs. It's a one-on-one situation.
Right.
And then even if it gets reported, if the abused elderly person were to say to a friend, my son, my uncle, whoever it might be, is doing this to me, and then you go to question him, I don't know what she's talking about. Her memory is bad. She's starting to get dementia. I've never done that. I've never said that.
Yeah.
It becomes very difficult, I would think, to evaluate and certainly prove something like that.
It does, especially when you're talking, legally. In cases of any kinds of these abuse, including financial, one avenue that we often use to stop the abuse is through family court, through an order of protection. But it is very difficult, even in that family court, with I know you were a prosecutor, burden of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt.
Right.
In family court, it's by preponderance of the evidence. It's much lower, and that means you have to kind of prove less. But even so, because this abuse happens behind closed doors, there's not usually a witness, and there is that incredible fear that once somebody finally comes forward, it's their word against the abusers, often. But it's still their word, and if you're constantly belittled and harassed, that can be a claim that can result in an order of protection.
How would you detect something like this, though? Is there? I don't think there's any legal prohibition. Unfortunately, you can't audio tape somebody's day for 48 consecutive hours, for example. But when I say it's legal, eavesdropping is illegal when you listen in on somebody else's conversation, but when you're a party to the conversation, it's not illegal to tape your own conversation, and there's no requirement to notify the other party. But it seemed to me you can't and wouldn't have the resources to do that in a case, for example, where there is that alleged, unless, for example, it always occurs at 2 o'clock in the afternoon when son comes to visit mom. And by 2:05 he is verbally abusing her or verbally threatening her. I assume that law enforcement, under those circumstances, if they believed it to be correct, could actually audio tape that and could lead to a successful prosecution.
Yeah, certainly.
Good. Glad to hear that. Let's talk about financial. That one is, unfortunately, I think far more prevalent than most people realize.
Yeah, financial is the most common, and it actually is incredibly widespread, and the monetary loss, there are several. Financial it's not only money that's gone, it's also, it can be physical effects of that, certainly emotional. So an earlier number that was kind of used as the gauge was $2.9 billion lost per year. However, a study just came out showing that is actually very low, and that it's $36.5 billion lost every year due to financial exploitation. And this includes consumer scams directed at seniors. It's not all just friends and family, but that is an incredible amount of wealth that's lost every year in the senior population. That's money that's not going towards retirement. That's money that's not going to go to their health care. And so it is by far the most common, but it can also really run the gamut. You have something as small as taking cash, from a parent or a grandparent.
Or taking their ATM card.
Taking their ATM card, saying, I'll get you some groceries, give me your ATM card and your PIN, and
I'll bring you the change.
Right.
And they bring some change, but it's nowhere near the amount that there actually was.
Correct.
One of the things that I used to emphasize when I was a guest here, for example, on the financial abuse, is if a total stranger begins to take an awful lot of interest in you, if you are a senior that is alone or mostly alone, and it gets to a point where they start to take you around, not that that's necessarily bad, but they start to take you, run your errands, well, you know, this would be much easier. I could pay your bills if you just give me a durable power of attorney. I assume that you see that oftentimes where somebody who was a stranger interjects themselves into the life of the senior, and then the next thing you know, they are regularly draining the account, and then with a durable power of attorney, once, if they get to the point of dementia, they have no way to know that the money is actually being withdrawn from their account, because they wouldn't be able to review their account to say what should be in it, what should be spent, and what should be left.
Right. And, yeah.
Go ahead. Is there a way to prevent that, and is there some type of warning that you can give to people, education that can be provided to seniors?
Sure. Well, there are so many misconceptions about financial instruments like power of attorney. A power of attorney is, and you say durable, just so everybody knows, durable means it is in effect even after...
while you're alive, no matter what other conditions occur.
Right. And that means from the minute you sign that with somebody, you appoint an agent. So the person who assigns power of attorney is the principal. The person they assign it to is the agent. I think the number one thing I'd want to get out about that is that you are essentially, when you appoint someone power of attorney, giving them access to all of your finances. There are limitations like a gifts rider that you can or cannot add. But make sure if you are going to appoint someone power of attorney, that it is your idea, that you contact an attorney who works with you, not someone coming to you and saying, hey, I think I should help you out with your finances, why don't you make me power of attorney? That person could have great intentions or they couldn't, but you need to be educated on exactly what powers you're giving up. Because you're right, we do see power of attorney abuse, and agents are legally obligated to act in the best interest of the principal. And if they don't do that, they themselves can face consequences. Powers of attorney can be revoked.
By simply signing the same way that you create the power of attorney in the first place.
Correct. But often, and this is unfortunate with this financial abuse, oftentimes, and we've had some success recovering funds that have been taken by abusers, but often it's rare to get all the money back. Often the funds are gone, and
they're in a casino somewhere.
They're in a casino, or even if you get a judgment, people are paying back at the rate of $300 a month when they stole $50,000, and the victim is 85.
And even if the victim were younger, if you've got that type of case, where a criminal case, for example, they can only pay back $300 a month. They're on probation. One of the conditions of probation is restitution. At a $50,000, it doesn't take rocket scientist or a mathematician to figure out nowhere near the $50,000 is even court ordered to be repaid. And there may be the order to pay the $50,000, but by the terms of the probation itself, $300 a month is $3,600 a year times 5 is $18,000. That's 36% of the money that was stolen. So even by the terms of the court probation, they're out 2/3 of their money.
Right.
And there's not a lot you can do about it other than take the civil judgment. And I would expect a lot of those people are judgment-proof anyway. What I mean by judgment-proof, by the way, is that they have a judgment against them. The judgment can be extended to make it last up to 20 years, but they have no resources which to attach or attack. So the monies may be there on paper that they owe, but they never have to repay it because they don't have at least the visible ability to repay it. So that's a problem. What about sexual? And when you told me about that, I was kind of astounded. And I just find the whole concept, well, it's revolting, obviously, but I really wasn't aware that that occurred. So could you talk a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, sexual abuse of the elderly population does occur. The most common perpetrators are grandsons. And it's not, oh, go ahead.
I was just wondering, is there an age range, grandsons? I mean, my grandparents have been gone for a long time, but there's some grandparents or grandkids that are in their 50s. Are we talking about younger ones, 16, 17, 18?
Well, yeah, younger grandsons. And it can be, forcible touching, rape, molestation of an elderly person. It can also be forcing an elderly person to watch explicit material against their will, putting on a pornographic tape and leaving the room so that they have to watch it. I mean, that is also sexual abuse of an elderly person. It does unfortunately happen. There are trainings where, I've looked at slideshows of the unique bruising that accompanies rape of the elderly, and unfortunately, it does happen in nursing facilities.
By the staff? Mm-hmm. Wow. That's really scary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is all a very small percentage.
Right, it's not everybody that's a caretaker.
It does happen. It does happen, and it is extremely underreported. I mean, it's probably the least reported, because it's such a, it's kind of, it's a vile thing, but the shame is incredible too.
Well, it seemed to me that it goes hand in hand with sexual abuse in all ages. I think if there's an underreported crime, by far the most prevalent, it would be some form of sexual abuse. I think we've made significant progress in that area.
Yeah.
But it's still very underreported. I think you were right. I think that it has a lot to do with the shame of it, or the person who actually perpetrated it. I don't know what he was thinking. I'm not going to get him in trouble. He could go to prison for a long time. It's all vile and disgusting. And then with the elderly, unless there's a caretaker, for example, a separate caretaker, obviously, looking for the bruising, then what happens is it may never get discovered. We have a phone call, Sarah. Do you mind if we take
Oh, sure.
caller? Would you state your question, please?
I was just wondering, there's people who go to the hospital because they think they have every ailment in the book.
True.
Is there people who unjustly call repeatedly because they think elder people are being abused? And how do we deal with that?
We had kind of a technical malfunction. We lost about 2 seconds of your question. Could you repeat it, please? I'm sorry.
Is there people who repeatedly call in wondering or thinking that some elder person in their life is being abused, but yet they're not actually happening? And how do you deal with that?
Either false reports, or intentional false reports, or good-natured, good-intended false reports. Is that what you're asking?
Yes, more of the person just may think it, whether or not it's necessarily true, or they may physically believe it, but it's not actually true.
Right. I mean, that certainly happens, not just in elder abuse, but in really any sort of reporting. And if the kind you're referring to is, we encourage people, if they suspect elder abuse, to report to Adult Protective Services, and those reports are anonymous. I'm sure that happens in cases of elder abuse, whether it's suspected. Unfortunately, I think it does happen, and sometimes in family where, one sibling isn't happy with mom living with another, and so they report suspected elder abuse. But I will say that those false reports are such a minority of the actual abuse that's going on that I do think that it's unfortunate it happens not just in elder abuse, but in every case. But I do think every report needs to be taken seriously and investigated.
Absolutely. That raises an interesting point, though, what you just indicated. It seemed to me that if you've got an elderly person who isn't suffering from dementia but is suffering from, for example, forgetfulness, one child could turn he or she, the elderly person, against the other child who's providing the care by saying, he's not doing this, he's not doing that, to get them perhaps to change their will so that one child gets cut out to the exclusion of everyone else, and that the child who files the report or convinces the elderly person to change their will, to put them in. It seemed to me that could happen.
Yeah, I mean, that certainly can happen, and that, we do see that a lot of our referrals are from families who are at a discord over what's happening to mom and dad, and accusations fly, and you see families divided. At Legal Services, our approach to those situations is that we focus on what the potential victim wants. So if we get a report, we investigate all areas. We speak with the alleged victim alone, and we kind of lay it on the table then, what's being said, what's not being said, how do you feel, how are you cared. We'll talk to home health care services agencies to make sure that they are, if they're in there, that they're not being mistreated. That's where the investigative part comes in. It does happen though, children try to manipulate situations to gain favor, and that's something that we encourage. If you're concerned about that, or if you're a parent and you're in that, or grandparent in that situation, that you call our agency, talk to Office for the Aging about the situation.
We will have some numbers on the screen a little later on. And there's one other form of abuse that you told me about. It's called neglect. You want to tell me about that, please?
Sure, yeah. Neglect, it can be active or passive. Active neglect is when somebody is able to give care and they don't. This can involve, this is where we see a lot of like situations where people are left in bed for weeks in urine-soaked mattresses, bed sores, covered with feces. That has happened. We've seen that. That does happen. And the caregiver just doesn't care. I don't care. And passive neglect is more, example I like to give is the husband and wife aging together in place, and maybe the wife has dementia and begins to lose her ability to care for herself and do the things she always did, like cooking, cleaning, etc. And the husband then, maybe he's kind of left to not only care for himself as he ages, but also her, and also pick up the slack where she's unable to perform those duties. And he's really trying his best, or she's trying her best, if you reverse the gender, but is unable to perform all the care she needs. So there is neglect, but it's not because he isn't trying his best.
So is there a way to help those people in particular, the passive neglectors?
Yeah, once it's identified, we encourage people, or if you're simply a caregiver and it's not something that you can handle anymore, we recommend calling local home health care agencies to try to see if you can. There are programs out there where people will come into your home and either do things ranging from cooking and cleaning to visiting nurses association, where nurses come into the home.
Provide medication, for example, check on wounds, things like that.
Yep.
And need not be embarrassed to do that. That's just part of growing old.
Right.
Wow, that's amazing. So is there a profile of an individual who performs neglect, or is it anybody?
I think it's anybody. Like I said, the cases that we see are people who are in a position of trust to the elderly person. Family, friends, neighbors, or sometimes, even, like you said, strangers whom the elderly person views as a new friend. I can say that the victim profile is somebody who is, it can be anybody. We used to think it was, the median age, I think, is like 70, 78 or 80. It's a little older. But the study that was just released with the $36.5 billion of financial shows that the range of victims is everyone from younger seniors to very old seniors, people with memory issues, to people who are still even employed and working. So I kind of answered both.
Yeah, it must be frustrating, though, particularly in the cases of people with dementia, when you have what appears to be a case of, for example, physical abuse or even financial abuse, to arrest and prosecute the perpetrator. I'm going to try to get as simple as I can legally, but when you don't have the victim, he or she, telling you what occurred because they can't, the only way you can prove that the abuse took place is through circumstantial evidence, because it's not very likely that physical abuse is going to occur in front of witnesses, unless they're part of the abusing process as well. So what do you do in a case like that? How do you? For the listening audience, the case of circumstantial evidence, which is, they give you a real brief description that they give in jury trials all the time. Direct evidence is you see it's raining. Circumstantial evidence would be somebody coming in with an umbrella and their coat is wet. That would be circumstantial evidence that it's raining. But in order to prove a circumstantial evidence case, you have to disprove to a moral certainty every hypothesis but guilt. And if you think reasonable doubt is a difficult situation to prove, the circumstantial evidence instruction given to the jury is almost insurmountable. I mean, you get past it. Well, I've gotten past it, but it's a difficult thing. How do you handle a perpetrator when all you have is circumstantial evidence? Does it get prosecuted, or do you have to just hope that it doesn't happen again?
Well, so I'm not a criminal attorney. I'm a civil attorney, so if those cases happen, we would take them to family court. However, for us, we need a client. For us to have a client, we need someone who has capacity. If you're talking about a person who has dementia to the point where they don't really know what's happening, but there's evidence on them, we would. There is a statute in the New York State Penal Code that protects vulnerable elderly persons.
That's correct.
Phone call.
Do you mind?
No, go ahead. Yeah.
Take another call.
I don't mean to interrupt. I'm sorry. I just wanted to be able to get in on time. This is Linda.
Hey, Linda, how are you?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Very well,
Jim?
thanks.
And good morning to your guest. It's so good to see you.
Good morning.
Good morning. I think you gave a presentation to the Chautauqua County Office for the Aging once about your legal services for the elderly.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yes, I was there. It's quite a program, and it's much needed. And I know it's been around for many years and has helped a lot of seniors and elderly.
I think the program itself is terrific. And I'm certainly not going to ask Sarah to come down on a regular basis, but I'll tell you what, the information she's provided provided us today has enlightened me on things I didn't know. So,
Yes.
And there's more information to impart yet this morning. So I'm real pleased, and I'm glad you went to her presentation. I'm sure it was excellent.
It was excellent. Sarah, I believe you came to our staff meeting, didn't you?
I was I have been to Chautauqua twice. One was with the Office for the Aging. I did a kind of like a presentation in Mayville, but there was people by computers. It was like a Skype kind of thing.
Yes.
And then there was also, I went to Chautauqua County Adult Protective Services in Mayville and gave a presentation there. Our office is offering free legal services, civil legal services to people who are in situations of elder abuse and would like representation, also with consumer scams, fraud contractors, telemarketers, etc. But I know that there are a lot of great programs right here in Chautauqua County. I believe at the end of the program we're going to have the phone numbers. There's an elder abuse prevention team right here in Chautauqua County. We're offering the civil legal aspect of that. For example, someone wanted order protection, and can afford an attorney or wants an attorney that has expertise in this area. That's where we would come down and represent that person.
Yes. Well, it's wonderful work that you're doing, and it's really astonishing the things that can happen to our elderly, the types of abuse that you talked about.
Yeah, it is. It's very sad to see people mistreated in the years of their life that are supposed to be, the golden years where you enjoy the benefits of all the hard work.
Yes.
And, what we can do to stop abuse and to ensure that people live a life in peace is something that we want to do if we can help in any way.
Yes. And, sometimes you see on the news where the elderly abuse escalates, and then there's a severe violent crime like a murder or severe maiming. I've seen those things, and we're like a daughter, it was a few years ago in another state. She really didn't mean to shoot her mother. I guess they had a fight, and her mother was elderly in an abusive situation. And it's really very tragic. It's good to be able to stop those things before they develop.
Yes, exactly. You're right. Prevention, and we really stress prevention, early identification, know the signs and symptoms, and watch out for yourself and also for friends and family, because it does escalate and it is deadly.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I'm calling about the Chautauqua County Office for the Aging Senior Employment Program, which I coordinate and direct. And we have free computer training in Dunkirk, at the Dunkirk Free Library, at the Brockton Library, at the Westfield Patterson Library, and the Jamestown Chautauqua County Office for the Aging on 3rd Street.
When does the training take place, Linda?
Pardon?
When does the training take place?
Oh, it's the peer coach is there every day, and it's a one-to-one situation. It's a computerized program that you have to be licensed for, and we have the licenses. We've gotten them from community grants. Some of the providers have also picked up the cost of the maintenance of the license. And the person comes in and they go on this, what they call Generations Online training. They work at their own pace, usually for an hour or two. There is a person there constantly with them, guiding them along. It can be like, for as long as the person needs. And then, of course, there's the completion and the training and graduation ceremony where we have public officials. Andy Goodell came. We have representatives from Tom Reed's office that have come. And for the graduation, Kathy Young has come to support our program. We have trained well over 1,000 people. It's a great program to get seniors involved in, and then after they complete that, then they can go on to higher forms of computer training at different places like the libraries or Chautauqua Works or JCC, whatever. So it really is great to get people involved in that.
An excellent program, Linda, and we certainly thank you for your efforts in that regard.
Well, thank you. And also we have our senior employment program. We do have slots available, but very few because we have a very large waiting list because of our reduced funding. And also there are other services with the Chautauqua County Office for the Aging, and people are advised to call our Mayville office at 753-4471.
Very good. Thank you again.
Well, thank you, and have a great weekend. Stay warm. I hope this Siberian Express leaves quickly.
Yeah, I think everybody feels that way now. I've never been a winter person anyway, so this has been miserable.
This has been dreadful. I heard in DeWittville it was 35 degrees below zero on Monday morning. That's not wind chill.
No.
That's regular temperature.
This is nasty.
Yeah, it is. Well, stay warm and have a great week. And
Thanks again, Linda. You too.
Thanks, Linda.
Okay.
Now,
Bye-bye.
we had a caller that left a question but did not wish to speak on the phone, but this is an interesting question. We have an excellent Meal on Wheels program, and I presume that's not just Chautauqua County, it's everywhere.
We love Meals on Wheels.
Do
They're the first line.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's what the question was. Are they
Yeah.
trained in any way, and do they actually report what they suspect if they see what they believe to be some type of neglect?
Yeah, I know in Erie County we have a Council on Elder Abuse. We actually meet at Meals on Wheels monthly, and we do trainings. We give them information to pass out to seniors on their routes. We have a SAFE program, Safety Awareness for the Elderly, so it has brochures, and we have Meals on Wheels pass them out. Because they are really people who are in the homes of seniors
Almost daily.
who are going to be the ones to identify, and it's so essential that they know the signs and symptoms. So I know in Erie County we certainly do that, and I would think that other counties would take advantage of that opportunity as well.
Do you get reports from other organizations, like Visiting Nurses you mentioned goes there?
Visiting Nurses Association we get reports from. We get reports from Erie County Senior Services, Adult Protective Services. Our office will get calls from hospitals. We just opened our domestic violence shelter network, elderly domestic violence shelter network, where we're asking hospitals to identify victims of elder abuse when they present at the hospital. Contact us so we can either try to place the victim in a shelter at a nursing home. We have a local nursing homes have agreed to provide shelter for victims of elder abuse while we work on a permanent safe placement for the person. So referrals really come from all over the community.
I know this is a difficult question to answer, but how many cases would you say occur in just Western New York? We're talking about Niagara, Erie, and Chautauqua County.
Well,
all of them first, and which is the most prevalent?
I can tell you there's the reported cases and there's the not reported, self-reported. In 2008, there was a study done by Lifespan about that's called the Elder Abuse Prevalence Study. And I think it was in Western New York, so Erie, Niagara, Chautauqua, and it may be including Wyoming.
Okay.
There was reported cases of, I think, maybe 2,000, but then when you multiply that by the number who are self-reported, so the study asked people, do you see this in your life, do you see this elder abuse in your life? And they would say, yes. Have you reported it? No. The estimate actually, based on the population that was over 60, was over 20,000 cases
Wow.
of elder abuse in that Western New York area.
And I expect that most of those were what we'd call founded cases of elder abuse, one of the different forms of elder abuse.
Yes, and it was, I mean, they asked people, it was financial, and it was questions like, does somebody ever use your money without your permission? You know, that's kind of the gauge. But yeah, over 20, and that was, so those aren't reported, those aren't confirmed reported to Adult Protective Services, but they are, I think, a better estimate of the number because
Probably correct.
it's so underreported, yeah.
And as much education as we give, as much as you can do, as much as your organization can do, it continues on.
Right, right.
Who else reports? Now, we talked about visiting nurses, we've talked about Meals on Wheels. Do children report?
Yeah, children report. We get self-referrals too. We have an elderly person call and say, this happened to me. We sometimes get courts referring, family court refers a case, but it is often third parties, so children or concerned neighbors saying, I think something's wrong with, Mrs. Smith. She used to go out all the time and now she doesn't, and this nephew of hers is always around, and I just don't know what's going on. Or actually financial institutions will report to us, banks will.
When it appears like there's money being taken in different or unusual quantities?
They'll report to Adult Protective Services, and sometimes they will also call us if the banking red flags go up. The overdraft payments for somebody whose bills were already paid on time. You have to keep in mind that elderly people are often living on a very fixed income, right? You get Social Security, maybe a pension, and so your bills are pretty consistent month to month. So that's one way to look at if there are huge withdrawals or all of a sudden this very consistent pattern is disrupted, that is something that causes people to wonder what's going on.
Are banks required to look into something like that? For example, a $10,000 cash payment to somebody who's never had a check written to them before?
Well, they were required to file SARS reports, suspicious activity report, but the threshold for that is pretty high. There has to be a significant amount of money missing, I think tens of thousands. I don't have the exact number.
So if somebody only has $20,000, that would never get reported? Even though they're taking, what would typically be a week's expenditures outside of bills would be, for example, $50, and all of a sudden it becomes $500, that doesn't get reported and investigated?
Well, I'm not saying it doesn't. They're not legally, they might not be legally required to report that, but banks do train their, especially tellers, and we've actually presented to M&T Bank, we've trained tellers there about what are the signs and symptoms of financial exploitation. And if you see these red flags, like the overdraft fees, bounced checks, use of an ATM card by someone who never used an ATM card, all of a sudden we've seen people literally dragged into a bank, propped with the teller, and told to make a withdrawal. And so, I think the banks are pretty well trained on that, and they're continually training and improving that way of identifying financial exploitation.
Do you contact the banks to offer that training to them?
Yes, we do.
I'd like to see all of them accept your offer to give them training.
And often they do have internal trainings too. They have their kind of own internal process for identifying and reporting that. But we also offer a training. We have, we've
How
done
many
that
on
in the
your
past.
staff?
We have 10 attorneys, 10 or 11 attorneys, and I think 10 paralegals, and then we have some support staff. So I think 25 are in our office.
Are you a profit organization? And I know the answer, but
Yeah.
non-profit organization?
No, we're a non-for-profit. We're funded through some grants, and we're funded through the Older Americans Act. So our legal services are free for people who qualify for them. Some of them are income-based, but for example, my project is not income-based. You can be a millionaire and decide you still wanted, me to represent you, and if your case fit our guidelines, I would.
Well, it actually makes some sense because you're the people trained in doing all of this, as opposed to, go back to what I said, one of my sore topics are lawyers that do things that they don't know what they're doing. And you get somebody that tries to help an elderly person that has been abused in one of the various forms of abuse and doesn't know what they're doing, and it actually may make the situation worse, where your situation is you're trained in it, that's all you do, you know what you're doing, and you know where to go and how to do it.
Right, right. Yeah, and we actually, I should mention for referrals, we have other attorneys who, when they see something going on, they'll call us and refer over to us, especially in suspicious like power of attorney, transactions or situations
That
like that.
raises an interesting point. There are bar associations. Erie County is extremely active. Chautauqua County is the only county, I think, in New York State that has 2 bar associations. But Niagara County has a bar association. I think every county has a bar association. That would be, number 1, a terrific program at one of their meetings, but number 2, offering your services to them so they understand. I don't know that attorneys understand that they can report it to you for some type of action.
Well, I think it's more, and we do a lot of, we reach out to the Bar Association a lot. I've written a little column to put in our bar bulletin. The Elder Law Committee is really good about, drawing attention to this issue. I think it's more people, or sometimes they'll just get a case where they feel uncomfortable, and there is attorney-client privilege, but if, for example, your client is going to be the principal who's supposed to be giving the POA, but their children are all fighting over it, and it looks suspicious, they might just give us a call and be like, hey, can you just talk to this person?
Another situation I can think of, it probably hasn't happened more than 2 or 3 times in my entire career, but where I've either gone to a house or to a hospital or a nursing home for somebody to do a will or a power of attorney, and having never even taken Psych 101 in college, having no training whatsoever other than through my job, look at somebody and say they're not competent to do this or that. And then 2 months later, this is the obviously catchword here, 2 months later, they've signed a power of attorney, they've signed a will. I'm not going to say that there are unethical attorneys out there, but I guess I'll say there's unethical attorneys out there as well. And what happens is, let me ask you this way, should an attorney in a situation like that report it to you? We're not really talking about confidential communications between the parties, because there's probably no communication between the attorney and the client. It was a determination that they weren't mentally competent to do what they were asked to do. Difficult one, huh?
Well,
difficult for me
it's difficult because I'm trying to think of what we could practically do in the situation. As I mentioned before, we need a client. So if the person in question doesn't have capacity, and you wouldn't do a power of attorney 2 months prior, I'm probably not going to be able to represent that person. However, we can, that there are channels within our profession to report unethical conduct. And there's also, in New York, when the power of attorney was amended in 2011, they created this process for people who are suspect abuse of power of attorney, even durable power of attorney, even when the principal's lost capacity, to do a power of attorney of accounting. You have to be either the principal asking for the accounting, or it can be law enforcement or any government agency, government office, and that includes Adult Protective Services. They can write to the agent and require a complete accounting of all activity done as power of attorney within 15 days. And if the agent does not provide that complete accounting within 15 days, the agency can then take it to a special court and have a judge review, and then that judge could conceivably, if they see that there's a lot of abuse, it's a durable power of attorney, the judge can order it to be revoked. I haven't personally done one, but it is a tool that we've used to get these accountings to show that there is mismanagement of funds as power of attorney.
Okay, the next logical step to that would be, though, for example, is the bank from which the account is, or the funds are being withdrawn, notified that the power of attorney's been revoked?
Yeah, in order for a power of attorney, one of the requirements for a revocation of a power of attorney is proper service on the agent. So they have to be served a copy of the revocation, and then banks, we also recommend mailing it to banks, revocation.
Yeah, otherwise it could say, hey, I've got the power of attorney, it's right here, and it looks like a valid document, and in fact it is a document that at one point was valid, it just no longer is.
And we always recommend that people to file, if you do revoke a power of attorney, file the revocation with your local county clerk's office. If it's on file, then that's considered notice to third parties. And we recommend mailing it, certainly, but then if the power of attorney is taking, say, a certified copy of that power of attorney and trying to do something with it, theoretically, these banks or other third parties have an obligation to, they're on notice that it's been revoked if it's filed in a public place.
Okay. Well, we know you're a not-for-profit organization, and you receive grant funding. Is that the only source of funding?
Well, for my job specifically, my grant's funded for the Department of Criminal Justice Services, and we also receive funding for my project and the elder shelter through the New York State Bar Foundation. M&T Bank has given some money for elder abuse prevention. We have some private fundraising we do
That's
twice
what I
a
was
year.
trying to get to.
We have a golf tournament every year in June. And we also have Champions for Justice Bash in usually November. And we have a direct mail drive where we send out requests to local attorneys asking them to donate to support our agency. Not just attorneys, but other professionals as well.
Yeah. Is there a way that people, if they're interested, can send you a donation?
Sure, yeah. You can go on our website. It's www.lsed.org. And there's information on how to donate there. We actually have a PayPal account, so if you wanted to donate right online, you can do, there it is. There's our PayPal. Or you can also, write directly to the agency at our address, which is 237 Main Street, Suite 1015, Buffalo, New York, 14203.
To whom would you make the check payable if you send a check?
Legal services for the elderly.
And credit card, do you accept credit cards as well?
Credit cards, yep, and on that PayPal on the screen right there, that would
That would have to be, I'm not too technically savvy here. So.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of new for us, too. We weren't that technically savvy, but we've kind of updated our website in the past year or so. So it's a nice new way to, accept donations. And we are a non-for-profit, but as it's the case with a lot of non-for-profits, like my job wouldn't exist if we didn't get the funding through DCJS,
Right.
And that is something we have to apply for year after year. And so really donations and is essential to us continuing to do what we do and spread the word about elder abuse prevention.
And one of the things that's important regarding what you just said, DCJS, and I've always known it as that, but Division of Criminal Justice Services is an arm of the state of New York. And New York State has been notoriously known for its tax rates and its taxing and budget cuts now. It's important that the general public, I would think, notify their legislators that it's important that programs like the one you are involved in continue, as opposed to cutting you to allow something else to happen. Grafton, Albany, for example, that was kind of a gratuitous barb at the legislators in Albany, but nonetheless, there are programs that need to be kept that are part of the state budget.
Right.
And it certainly is important. Again, you wouldn't even have your job if it were not for the DCJS grant. And
right.
Obviously, you are extremely knowledgeable in what you do. I'm sure very competent and proficient in what you do. And it would be tragic to the people of Western New York should you not be able to do it anymore. We don't have much time left. Do you want to give me a 30-second summary of what it is that you think is very important for people to do or think?
I think it's really important to become educated on these issues, to take time, go to our website. We also have the Council on Elder Abuse website, which is councilonelderaBuse.org, that people take time to familiarize themselves with the signs and symptoms. And if you suspect elder abuse in any way, please reach out, report it. The worst thing, if it's not happening, fine, but if it is, having somebody notified is so important. And I'd also just like to add that I didn't really touch on too much on consumer scams today, but our office has a really great department that fights consumer scams, telemarketers, and that is a huge, can have a huge economic impact. People lose, we've had people lose over $100,000 of their own savings being a part of those scams. So if you suspect anything like that, any scams like that, please also give our office a call.
Very good. Sarah, it's been a pleasure. It's been very informative. I want to thank you for being here and thank you for what you do.
Thank you so much.